Well, our London tour is pretty much done. We're getting ready to leave the room. It's a pretty nice room. Nice little amenities and all. So we're going to get ready to catch the train, or get to the train station, not the subway, but the train station, and make our way out. Give a quick walk through the bathroom too, just for sake of argument. Nice spacious bathroom. Got a little handicap shower. We got a handicap room, so it's definitely spacious. But yeah, we're pretty much ready to go. So let's go catch the train. We was staying at the Royal National Hotel. Pretty nice place. Nice lobby. Good breakfast. Nice rooms. If we come back, we're gonna have to stay here again. Nice place. Well, we're at the train station, Clapham Junction, getting ready to get on the train to Southampton. So, yep, going for a little bit of a train ride, leaving London. So, stand by for some footage.
Scheduled time arriving into Weymouth this morning is 10:08. Please note safety information is displayed in all company.
We're in Southampton, and our train ride is over. Well, we're now in Southampton, walking around, trying to make our way to the seaside, or whatever it is, Titanic Museum. Well, we specifically booked a hotel close enough to this museum so we didn't have to catch a ride there. We could just walk. But here we are, more or less. It is the Sea City Museum, which also features the Titanic story. See if this place is open. We're a bit early, but let's see if we could get inside and not wait too long. It's cold out here. There's a special exhibition, Southampton Stories, which has different museum collections and stories of the people and events of the city across different points in time. I think an interesting factoid. The railway that we were on reached Southampton in 1840 after some docks were just established in 1838 outside the old town. Interesting. Even in the Middle Ages, Southampton was one of England's leading ports. The town's stone walls were built between the 1100s and 1400s. Interesting. Letters patent of Charles II, February 9th, 1662. Charles II dated his reign from the day of his father's execution on January 30th, 1649, rather than by the date of his own restoration, 1660, disregarding 12 years of Commonwealth rule. Coronation of Queen Elizabeth II was celebrated in Southampton like the rest of the country, with parties and parades and fireworks. Cunard's liner Coronia arrived in Southampton on June 1st, 1953, with almost 600 Coronation Cruise passengers. 1977 Silver Jubilee was celebrated in Southampton with street parties and a Jubilee parade. Queen and Prince Philip visited Southampton in August aboard the Royal Yacht Britannia. In 2012, Cunard liners Queen Mary II, Queen Victoria, and Queen Elizabeth led Southampton's Diamond Jubilee celebrations. Got different pictures of decorations during the Queen's coronation in 1953. Even have a bonfire during the coronation. Carnival floats on wagons. Parades through the street. Of course, Southampton had its part in war, especially during World War II, being touched by the Germans, unfortunately.
I hear that Maple was selling margarine. It was somewhere in Maple.
Got pictures of bomb damage through the town. Aerial view after the war showing the amount of damage that occurred. How many bombs fell on Southampton during the war? About 33,000. Southampton Blitz. Blitz started in London but extended to other important military industrial centers, including Southampton. $2,300 bombs were dropped, as well as over 30,000 incendiary devices, causing damage to around 45,000 buildings and a significant loss of life. Fire caused by the bombing of the International Cold Store burned for 9 days due to the store containing 2,300 tons of butter. The butter fueled the fire. During D-Day, the docks in Southampton were a staging area for the invasion going across the English Channel. In October 1944, 1 million U.S. soldiers passed through Southampton docks since D-Day. The town was full of equipment waiting to go across the channel. Commemorative plaque installed at Jack's Corner Southampton Sports Center in 1950 commemorates Jack Mannell, who was awarded the Victoria Cross in July 1940 for his brave action while serving as an anti-aircraft gunner aboard the HMS Foylebank, which cost him his life. Even after his leg was shattered by a bomb, he kept fighting to the end. Even before World War II, different conflicts had troops leaving Southampton to go to different points around the world, such as in South Africa in 1900. Well, the South African War of 1899 to 1902. More than 500,000 soldiers went to South Africa from Southampton. They used ocean liners that were quickly converted over to troop transports. Even in 1982, during the Falkland Islands War, the British had to send troops over there on ocean liners. The QE-2 and Canberra became troop transports. Unfortunately, the slave trade played a role in the UK way back when, with a lot of trade going through Southampton, going to points beyond like the Caribbean and other British colonies, like America, for example. But in 1807, Britain abolished the slave trade, even though it did participate and profit from that institution, indirectly or otherwise. Goods like sugar, cotton, and tobacco, which obviously were worked by enslaved peoples, were traded through different ports, including Southampton. So even if the people weren't directly involved in moving enslaved peoples, they profited one way or another. But on the other hand, the British Navy did take a front seat to stopping slave ships moving enslaved peoples through the Caribbean and around the coasts of Africa. Obviously, there were a lot of British colonies and influence throughout the Caribbean, places like Jamaica and other points in the Caribbean, Cayman Islands and all touched by the British Empire. A lot of trade going on, and of course illicit slave trade. Of course, with the slave trade came stories of the enslaved, especially escapes, like Ellen Craft, who was fair-skinned, born in Georgia after the slave master raped one of the slaves. She managed to escape and was able to tell her story across Britain. Of course, everybody knows the story of Frederick Douglass, who also escaped, and he traveled to Britain, where he toured the country giving lectures, trying to push for abolition. A Shakespearean stage actor Ira Aldridge, he actually had to go to Britain after racial attacks on the theater where he was performing, and he ended up becoming the first black actor to play Othello on a West End stage. Of course, the most, when you think of Southampton, you think of ocean liners, namely the Titanic, but ocean liner traffic all the way up to the cruise liners of today have come and went through Southampton. Thousands, hundreds of thousands of travelers move through Southampton. Hundreds of ships come through here all the time. Of course, the ocean liners of the past were bathed in luxury to a level that some would probably say is higher than the cruise ships of today. And they were pretty much set up to be like luxury hotels where mainly the rich and well-off were to partake of it. Obviously, the lower class sections didn't have as many amenities. Cunard Line was started in 1840, and they merged in 1934 with the White Star Line. Government loan helped build two large liners, Queen Mary and Queen Elizabeth, and a new Mauretania was also built. All three of those ships played important roles during the Second World War. They were troop ships. Union Castle Line was formed in 1900. In 1921, Windsor Castle and sister ship Arundel Castle became the only four-funnel ships to serve on a route uttered into North America. They were requisitioned as troop transports as well during the war. Of course, as air travel took over, the need for large ocean liners like these went down, so their numbers went down. Even though Southampton had already been an important port, it wasn't until 1842 when the first dock opened to allow the larger steamships to come in and dock. Besides passengers, a lot of goods, cargo moved through these docks. And of course, the larger the ships, the more you had to dredge the waters to make it deep enough in order for these large ships to be able to come in to the harbors. Like this equipment right here, a dredger. And as they dredge out the bottom, they find things like huge sandstone boulders. Interesting. In keeping up with Southampton's world port status, in 1620, the Pilgrim Fathers on the Mayflower actually left Southampton on their way to North America. Another interesting fact, as stated before, even as far back as the medieval times, Southampton played an important hub in world trade, with goods coming from Italy and points beyond on the main continent, destined to other points within the British Isles. The Day and Summers Company began building steam engines for ships in the 1830s, and then whole ships themselves. They remained the only iron shipbuilder until the 1870s. In 1928, the company went into liquidation and was taken over by Thornycroft, which had another yard in Woolston. Another interesting factoid: what year did Southampton become a city? 1964. Interestingly enough, Southampton had trams starting in 1879, but went on till shortly after World War II. The last day of the trams was on 31st September 1949. From then, they went on to buses. Guess it was cheaper to operate buses instead of the tram system. In the early days, people would take huge logs and cut them into what would pass as a boat of sorts to cross the water, such as this piece right here, dated back to around 668 to 704 AD. Early days of Southampton. According to this timeline, the earliest human remains in Britain were around 500,000 BC. Long time ago. Of course, during that same time, Europe and Britain were once a single landmass. And of course, everything was primitive, such as their tools. As they got better at their skills, they utilized different tools. Bones, flint, rocks, you name it. They started carving out different things. As humans got better at crafting tools, they learned how to make bronze, which was a tough metal alloy that signified a whole age. Once they started doing that, sky was the limit. All kinds of tools were produced. Moved forward, and they started working with iron. And, well, even more advancements were made. In the very beginning, Southampton was known as Hamwick, a Saxon town. It was a major trading settlement from European settlers passing through. Interesting thing to know, the Romans had conquered Britain in 43 AD and settled on the east bank of the Itchen River. Founded shortly afterwards, it became an important port, serving as a regional capital at Venta Belgarum, however you say that, which is where Winchester is at. So, as far as Southampton, there were a lot of peoples already moving through these areas during that early time. As we know, the Roman Empire stretched from Scotland to the Arabian Gulf. So there was a lot of activity already in the area as far back then as the dates indicated. Of course, you can't talk about Southampton without talking about the Titanic. And the Titanic had 897 crew members, but 3/4 of them were living in Southampton in the days before the ship sailed. And obviously the crew had family living here, whether in hotels, hostels, rented rooms, waiting to get on the ship. And that crew did all manner of jobs, from the band, to the pilots, to the colliers stoking the furnaces on the ship, to lookouts, to servers. You had the key figures in the Titanic, many of which died with the Titanic. Captain Edward Smith, Second Officer Charles Lightoller, Coal Trimmer Walter Francis Fredericks, Mabel Bennett, stewardess, Sidney Sedunnery, steward, lookout Archie Jewell. Titanic was one of the 3 Olympic-class liners built for the White Star Line, launched from the Harland Wolff Yard in Belfast in 1911. For another year it was fitted out, and then in April 1912, taken on a trial run to make sure everything was good. Then the next day she leaves for Southampton and arrives midnight April 4th. It's even said her masts and funnels could be seen rising high above the trees and houses from the top of the common. Because of the coal strikes and other unemployment issues, a lot of people flocked to sign up to work on the Titanic, as, well, they were out of work. So even if they'd never been to sea before, they were lining up to get on the new ship so they can get back to work. These 2 guys here could be considered the luckiest 2 involved with the Titanic, because they actually missed their ride. They had jobs on the ship and went to get a last few drinks, and they headed back for the docks. They stopped to let a train pass, and even though they reached the ship on time, they thought they reached the ship on time, but they were wrong. The Titanic was riding off without them. Lucky for them, though, the Titanic almost had a close call with another ship before even leaving. As it went by, its wash caused another ship, the New York, to break loose from its moorings, and they pretty much almost hit each other as a result. It's kind of wild how the 3rd class room was literally a closet with a few bunks to house all these people with one little sink. They were very cramped quarters. 2nd class was a little bit better, had a little more room. Have a little model right here of one of the provision rooms. 1st class smoke room. Actually, that would be 1st class. That would be 2nd class smoke room right there. Got our engine room. These look like a little bit better quarters. Not sure if that would be considered the 1st class room right there. More spacious. Of course, we have our coal furnaces, gigantic heat plants for supplying the heat to make the steam to drive the steam engines. All these areas were actually the first to be flooded when the ship hit the iceberg and started taking on water. All the crew and cargo areas, like the first quarter to the third of the ship, sustained a gash and took on enough water to flood all these areas. Titanic was as long as 31 double-decker buses and almost 20 foot taller than the Civic Center in Southampton, as you can see from the grid right there. The ship was huge for its time, and surprisingly, by today's standards, compared to modern cruise ships, It is actually tiny, if you can believe that. Fully loaded, the Titanic weighed more than 52,000 tons. Of course, it needed enormous anchors and chains to hold it down. 2 side anchors weighed 7.8 tons. Center anchor weighed 15.8 tons. Each link in the chain was shaped by manpower with a hammer and anvil and weighs around 12 stone and 8 pounds, or 80 kilograms, about the same as an average adult man. Big chain links. Look at those things. Of course, a ship like the Titanic or any cruise ship is literally a city on the sea. Some areas, of course, in the case of the Titanic, were spared no expense in their accommodations for first class when it comes to luxury, while others were just getting by enough to get by. So obviously, classism played a heavy role in how the Titanic operated, which is unfortunate, but it's not the case now. As stated, first class had access to different forms of entertainment like tennis, shuffleboard, and the like, while third class did not, and the crew only visited these areas in order to perform work such as basically scrubbing the decks. Of course, part of that luxury was the iconic grand staircase, which everybody knows about when they think of the Titanic. There were grand staircases at the center and the front of the ship. Forward one goes 7 flights from the Turkish baths up to the boat deck. The roof at the top is actually a skylight. Of course, any first class passengers can take an elevator if they didn't want to run the stairs. Here's a model of a second class cabin. A little bit more room than the third class cabin. You got 2 bunks, face bowl, and a cabinet for your stuff. Not exactly a Carnival cruise ship room, but a lot better than a third class room though. No windows, however. Of course, new for the time, radio technology. The Marconi room allows messages to be sent and received via wireless telegraph. During the day, a range of 250 miles can be achieved, but at night, signals can be sent or received over 2,000 miles. Signals bounce off the atmosphere at night. That's how ham radios tend to get messages around the world. But even in 1912, radio technology played a key role as soon as it came into the scene. As we could see here from these testimonies, some of these crew survived. Ed Brown's steward, he was rescued. Even though he tried to help people onto the lifeboats, he got thrown overboard, but luckily his life vest kept him afloat to be picked up onto a boat himself. Archie Jewell, the lookout, he was able to make it onto one of the first lifeboats launched. Sidney Sedinary, he unfortunately did not make it. He was lost. Mabel Bennett, she was wearing a fur coat that kept her warm while on the lifeboat and hung on to it well into the 60s. Walter Francis Fredericks, coal trimmer, he was picked up as well. As his lifeboat was pulling away, the Titanic's lights are bright and the band is still playing. Spends the night in his work gear, which was a shorts and short sleeve shirt, so he was miserable, but he was alive. Second Officer Lightoller thought to be dead, but he actually did survive. He actually got pulled under sucked into a ventilation shaft, and as the seawater hit the boilers and turned to steam, it actually pushed him back to the surface where he was able to get on a life raft. So he narrowly missed death. Captain Smith, unfortunately, did go down with the ship. It doesn't take long for the news of the Titanic sinking to reach Southampton, but it takes a long while before those who survived actually manage to make it back home, between bureaucratic issues and just the idea of trying to sort out who survived back in New York, where the Carpathia, the ship that rescued the Titanic survivors, docked. Once they found out who was who, they could sort out everything and start getting people back home, as well as sort out who did not make it, such as the one seaman that we talked about, Sidney Sidenary. He died, and some of his effects were returned to his spouse, unfortunately. Some people got recognition for bravery in the face of death, helping others above themselves. The past is past. The inquiry's accomplishments did end up making future sailing safer, in the sense that they took time to put more lifeboats, more searchlights, more radio operators, everything necessary to ensure that if something happens on board a ship, somebody will be notified, and everything possible will be done to save everybody on board of any ship if such a disaster happens again.
Crow's Nest that night has caught the public's imagination. Sir Rufus Isaac tackles Managing Director of the White Star Line, J. Bruce Ismay, on the subject of binoculars.
Have you considered the use of binoculars at all for your lookout men, Mr. Ismay?
Yes, I have.
Were they supplied on the Titanic?
I believe they have them on the run round from Belfast to Southampton.
Had your company come to the conclusion that binoculars were of assistance to the lookout men?
I believe that up to the year 1895, we used to supply lookout glasses to the lookout men. And since that date, I think it's been left to the discretion of the commander whether he gives them lookout glasses or not.
But if he elects to do it, then you supply them.
We certainly would, if they were asked for.
Have you considered the use of searchlights?
I have not.
That has never been considered by you.
It has never been considered by us at all.
The testimony of Second Officer Charles Lightoller sheds further light on the issue. He believes that binoculars would not have helped because of the conditions that night.
Everything was against us. In the first place, there was no moon. Then there was no wind, not the slightest breath of air. And most particular of all in my estimation is the fact, a most extraordinary circumstance, that there was no swell. Had there been the slightest degree of swell, I have no doubt that the berg would have been seen in plenty of time to clear it.
The lack of swell was important. Even with binoculars, it would have been hard to see the iceberg from a distance. But Frederick Fleet, the lookout on duty that night, and who saw the iceberg as it loomed over the Titanic, has strong views on the subject of binoculars.
Mr. Fleet, could you describe what it was you saw that night?
Well, a black object.
What did you do?
I struck 3 bells.
Was it right ahead of you or on the port or starboard bow?
Right ahead.
When you were in the Oceanic and employed there as the lookout, did you have glasses?
Yes.
Glasses provided for you in the Crow's Nest?
Yes. Every trip.
And now, on the Titanic, did you ask for glasses?
I did not, but George Simmons did. He was a lookout man too.
You had better tell us what he said.
He said there were none on board for us. He intended for us.
Now Thomas Scanlon, MP, representing the National Sailors and Firemen's Union, interjects to ask questions.
Mr. Fleet, I understand that you had glasses in the Crow's Nest during the journey from Belfast to Southampton.
Yes.
Were those taken from you at Southampton?
Yes.
And do you think if you had glasses, you could have seen the iceberg sooner?
Certainly.
How much sooner do you think you could have seen it?
Time for the ship to get out of the way.
So, it is your view that if you had glasses, it would have made all the difference between safety and disaster?
Yes.
The lack of binoculars in the crow's nest may have contributed to the disaster, as did the absence of searchlights.
And we believe that ships should carry searchlights, that every man taking a look out in such ships should undergo a sight test at regular intervals.
The inquiry is attempting to cut through the confusion of that terrible night. Were those in third class, in steerage, forgotten in a rush to claim places in the lifeboats? John Hart, one of the stewards in third class, gives evidence.
About how many third-class passengers had you in your sections altogether?
Somewhere about 58. 9 were men.
Can you help us fix the time when the order was given to pass the third-class women and children up to the boat deck?
The vessel struck, I believe, at 11:40. It must have been 3 parts of an hour before the word was passed down to me.
This would be about 12:30.
Yes, sir.
In order that your third-class women and children should get up to the boat deck, they would have to mount a number of decks and go up a number of stairs. You led them.
I went ahead of them.
At that time, were there any barriers that at ordinary times are closed, but they were open?
There were barriers that at ordinary times are closed, but they were open.
So, where did you take the passengers to?
I took them to the only boat that was left then, boat number 15.
Now, this is an important point. You say the only boat that was left.
That I could see.
Was there room for them in it?
Yes, they were placed in it.
Did you see anyone keeping the third-class passengers back so as to prevent them getting to the boat deck?
No, my lord.
So, according to you, all the women and children who were taken up and who wanted to escape could have done so.
I do not doubt that for a moment.
Can you explain how it was, that being so, that 55% of the women of the third class were drowned?
I cannot account for it. No, sir.
Despite the fact that no third-class passengers were called as witnesses, the inquiry concludes that every soul on the Titanic had an equal chance of survival.
It had been suggested before the inquiry that the third-class passengers had been unfairly treated, that their access to the boat deck had been impeded, and that when at last they reached that deck, the first and second-class passengers were given precedence in getting places in the boats. There appears to have been no truth in these suggestions.
Was the Titanic going too fast for the sake of commercial reasons? Should she have slowed as she headed toward ice? Managing Director of the White Star Line, Mr. J. Brooks Ismay, is at the stand.
Sir, if you were approaching ice in the night, it would be desirable, would it not, to slow down?
I am not a navigator.
Answer the question.
Lord Mersey has interjected.
Yes. I say no, I am not a navigator.
You have told us that you spoke with the chief engineer about running the ship at full speed. Was Captain Smith present?
He was not.
And you had no conversation with him during the voyage about speed?
Absolutely not.
Then will you tell us how it was? He was to become aware of your decision to increase the speed on Tuesday?
Mr. Ismay said he planned to run the Titanic at full speed on Tuesday the 17th of April as they approached New York, but the ship struck the iceberg on the night of the 14th.
I think the engineer would probably spoken to him.
Did you make any arrangement with the engineer about that?
I did not.
So, at all events, you had no conversation with the captain about it?
Absolutely none.
The American Senate inquiry, which finished at the end of April, suggested that Mr. Ismay wanted Titanic to arrive at New York in record time, a charge Mr. Ismay has vigorously denied.
Then you did know on the Sunday morning that in the ordinary course of things between then and the Monday evening, you might be increasing your speed to full speed.
I knew that if the weather was suitable, either on the Monday or the Tuesday, that the vessel would go at full speed for a few hours. I want to ask you this question.
That's Thomas Scanlon, representing the National Sailors and Firemen's Union.
I want to ask, by what right had you, an ordinary passenger, to decide the speed of the ship without any consultation with the captain?
Well, I can answer that.
Lord Mersey is restless again.
No. You are asking him something which is quite obvious he has no right.
But he may, as a super captain.
What sort of person is a super captain?
I will tell you as I conceive it, my lord. And as a man, like Mr. Ismay, who could say to the chief engineer of a ship what speed that ship should be run at.
A number of the witnesses were also questioned about the speed of the Titanic during the voyage, and the inquiry has come to a conclusion. Sir Rufus sums up.
We are left in some difficulty in understanding what took place between Mr. Ismay and Captain Smith. But I do not think there is evidence that Mr. Ismay interfered. When Captain Smith showed him the ice warning, he should have said, "Go slow." He did not. Captain Smith should have slowed down.
The inquiry wants to know who made the decision about the number of lifeboats to be included in the design of the ship. Managing Director of the White Star Line, Mr. J. Bruce Ismay, is being cross-examined by Clement Edwards, MP.
You, Mr. Ismay, were one of those responsible for determining the number of lifeboats.
I was.
If you had not taken the view that the Titanic was unsinkable, would you have insisted in the plans for provision being made for a larger number of lifeboats?
No, I think not. She conformed to the Board of Trade requirements. In fact, she was largely in excess of the Board of Trade requirements.
You were one of those as the managing director responsible for determining the number of boats?
Yes, in conjunction with the shipbuilders.
When you got into the lifeboat, you thought that the Titanic was sinking?
I did.
Did you know that there were some hundreds of people on that ship who must go down with her?
Yes, I did.
Has it occurred to you that, except perhaps apart from the captain, you, as the responsible managing director, deciding the number of boats, owed your life to every other person on that ship?
It has not.
The inquiry then asked the most senior surviving officer, Second Officer Charles Lightoller, if there had been lifeboat drills for passengers and crew, and if there were enough crew able to launch the lifeboats. Thomas Scanlon, MP, asks the questions.
Mr. Lightoller, do you think you have a sufficient number of competent seamen, including officers, for the launching of the lifeboats?
Yes, as it proved, we had.
The inquiry found that there had been no lifeboat drills while the Titanic was at sea, and so the crew were unsure as to how many people could be loaded into the lifeboats. Lord Mersey, the Wreck Commissioner, wants to get more facts on that point.
Mr. Lightoller, I want to know whether you knew that those boats were not intended to be lowered full of people. Did you know that?
We have no instructions to that effect, my lord. I should not think they were capable of being lowered full of people. They may be. I have never seen them full of people. But if they are only supposed to carry 65 people afloat, it hardly seems feasible that they would carry 65 people when suspended at each end.
So, do you think you could have filled the boat still more on the water?
Undoubtedly.
The conclusion of the inquiry on this point is obvious.
We find that the provision of lifeboat and raft accommodation on board such ships should be based on the number of persons intended to be carried in the ship and not the tonnage. The accommodation should be sufficient for all persons on board. There should be training for crew in the use of lifeboats and drills for passengers.
The British Board of Trade Inquiry here at the Scotch Drill Hall in London has been examining the role of wireless communication and the ice warnings that were received by the Titanic in the days and hours leading up to the disaster. Sir Rufus Isaacs is asking wireless operator Harold Bride about them.
Mr. Bride, would you tell us, so far as you were able, what was the first message you recollect with regard to ice reports?
The first message I recollect on the 14th of April was from the California.
And would you tell me what was the message that you recollect receiving on the 14th?
It stated that the Californian was passing close to large icebergs and gave the latitude and longitude.
You were busy at the time?
Yes, I was doing the accounts.
Did you send any message yourself in answer?
Yes, I acknowledged to receive the report to the Californian.
And then you went on adding up your accounts?
Yes, that is correct.
Then you had not written it down when you heard it?
No.
You knew it was a message to the Titanic reporting ice?
Yes.
So, what did you do when you got that message?
I delivered it to the officer on the bridge.
The Californian was a ship that had stopped due to an ice field and was captained by Stanley Lord. She was just 8 miles away at the time of the disaster.
Captain Lord, close upon 11 o'clock, did you see a steamer's light?
I did.
Did you think the vessel approaching you was the Titanic?
No. I remarked at the time that it was not the Titanic.
If the Californian had steamed toward the Titanic when she saw the distress rockets, more souls may have been saved. But, critically, the Californian's wireless operator had gone off duty at 11 o'clock, before Titanic struck the iceberg.
Would it not have been quite a simple thing for you, when you were in doubt as to the name of the ship and the reason of her sending up rockets, to have wakened up your Marconi operator and asked him to speak to this ship?
It would if it had worried me a great deal, but it did not worry me.
And now, in the light of your experience, would it not have been a prudent thing to do?
Well, we would have got the Titanic signals if we had done.
And that's the point. There is no requirement for wireless operators to keep their machinery working at all times. The Californian had only one operator, whilst Titanic had two. The conclusion of the inquiry now seems obvious.
That in all ships there should be an inclusion of wireless telegraphy, and that such installation should be worked with a sufficient number of trained operators to secure a continuous service night and day.
As stated, between the inquiries and different changes made in maritime travel, as well as technological advancements, seafaring is a lot safer than it was back then. They've got things like immersion suits that can keep people warm and waterproof even in the icy cold waters like what the Titanic sank in. Obviously, satellites can move signals around the world in record time, a lot faster than a telegraph operator can. Rescue helicopters can move people to and from ships to land or other ships if need be. Even the lifeboats and life rafts are a lot better. Like the lifeboats we see on cruise ships now are almost like mini submarines to a degree. They're completely sealed off, where even if the ship is in a stormy condition, these lifeboats cannot be sunk. They could be flipped over and everything. They won't go down. Even the rafts are safe enough that they can withstand a lot of punishment and hold a lot of people. A lot better than the rowboats that were used as lifeboats way back when. There's even an international ice patrol that watches for icebergs in the North Atlantic shipping routes, so they can relay that information to ships in the area so they can keep a watch. Radio distress beacons, either on the ships, on the lifeboats, they can send signals via satellite the moment they hit the water. Like they actually use the salt water to help power. Even the Olympic, sister ship to the Titanic, immediately had extra lifeboats added shortly after, on 21st of April, 1912. And now, a lot of these ships, cruise ships and the like, they equip enough lifeboats and rafts to supply everybody on the ship, crew and passenger included. The only reason that a ship may not have a lot of lifeboats or life rafts is because the crew is very small, such as on a cargo ship or a freighter. Pretty interesting, the idea that the Sea City Museum is actually housed inside an old government building, part of which is still being used for government purposes. But in this section of the government building, it's being used as a museum. So, yeah. Pretty cool setup. Old world architecture. Even the bathrooms are old world. But this is a museum in a government building. Cool, ain't it? We're taking a little stop at a mall in Southampton here. We got time to spare before we go into the hotel. It's not a big mall, but it's got all the different stores that you would typically see in a mall. Got our food court. Got a little courtyard area here. Pretty cool looking setup. Not seeing anything of value, we're going to check out another place that was recommended to us a little ways down the street. It's supposed to be an even bigger mall. Stand by. Found another mall. It does look like it's a little bit bigger. See what this place has to offer. Trying to see if we can find us some souvenir t-shirts from this particular area. Let's see what we can find. Good size mall.
I'm wearing dress for half two, so
Third floor.
he's going to go to.
Got a fairly decent sized food court. Plenty of selections to choose from. Almost feeling a little hungry now, but I don't want to eat right away. We have Big Sarah. It is a skeleton of an Allosaurus displayed in this small area in another food court. Interesting. You got a dinosaur skeleton in a mall. Unique. Kind of looks like some old castle ruins or something. I don't know, it looks cool. Got some other pictures of the similar stuff back by the mall. Pretty cool setup. If that is genuine, that'd be awesome because it looks old as hell. Got another little outdoor shopping area near the same mall we just went to. Got a lot of stuff here. Plenty of places to spend money, just like London. course, we had to try out at least one spot as far as dining. We picked this place right here, Grumpy Monkey Bar. They actually had some pretty good barbecue wings. They had jalapenos on top of them and all. They were pretty good. They even had a burger that was pretty good too. So, yep, we're nice and full on that stuff. We've seen a gelato place that I might end up checking out too in a bit. So we're gonna go check that out as well. Well, we went to Sprinkles Gelato right down the street from Grumpy Monkey, and we have some gelato, ice cream, in waffle cones. So I'm gonna put this away so I can eat some of this stuff while we walk back to the hotel. Catch you in a minute.